Well, thank you for joining me in these beautiful prayers. And I I think I went a little slowly today. I don't know. The mood was a little bit slow, but these are most uplifting prayers. Probably most of you know that these hymns we sing every evening. The first two are composed by Swami Vivekananda for his spiritual master, Sri Ramakrishna, and they're universal hymns, really, to the divine, but with the focus on Sri Ramakrishna. And interestingly, in the first hymn, the Kandana Bhavabandhana, never is Sri Ramakrishna's name even mentioned. It's a universal hymn. And I have heard that there's a church in Calcutta where they sing this hymn for Jesus. So it's a kind of universal hymn. And yet, of course, for us, we think we connect it especially to Sri Ramakrishna. And then the second hymn is a Sanskrit hymn, also to Sri Ramakrishna, the hymn of seeking refuge. And then the traditional verses to the Divine Mother is the third hymn. And then the fourth hymn is the hymn composed by Swami Abhedananda for Sri Sarada Devi. We call her our Holy Mother. So tonight I thought to have a little bit more formal discourse on making friends with death. And it seems like an appropriate topic, though there was some complaint yesterday that it seems like a rather dark topic, and death is very much in the news nowadays. With the global pandemic going on, it seems like death is lurking just around the corner, just behind us. And over 5 million people have died, right, from this pandemic worldwide. The numbers I looked up at the end of November, in the United States, 777,000 people had died of COVID by the end of by that time. And I remember when it first came to 100,000, it was huge news, and then 200,000 it was noted, and after that it wasn't even noted. It keeps climbing and it keeps climbing, and in the 2020 it's the third leading cause of death. 345,323 people died, not including deaths from other unaddressed causes, people who couldn't go to the hospital for a heart problem because the hospital's full, and then they ended up also dying. So a lot of deaths in the news. It is behind heart disease. 690,000 died of heart disease in 2020, and cancer, 599,000. But it's ahead of death from injuries, including accidental overdoses, which is at 192,000, and death by stroke, which is at 159,000. So there's a lot of ways to die, and there's COVID is just one of them. And of course now, since the last couple of months, again, Omicron has come, or I'd like to say Om-macron. And so people are afraid. People are afraid. And yes, we are, most of us, somewhere we are afraid to die. We're not, or maybe we're not ready to die. And yet, we will die. Each and every one of us, we will die. This is guaranteed. And yet we don't want to face that. We don't want to admit it. And this is one of those mysteries that King Yudhishthira, the Pandava king, had this insight when he was asked by the Yaksha, what is the most amazing thing in this world? What is really the most unusual, the most amazing thing? And he said, the most amazing thing is this, that ahanyani bhutani gacchanti hayamalayam sheshasta varamichanti kimascharyamatah param. What is more amazing and strange and wonderful and unusual than this, that everywhere around us we see people dying. We see people dying everywhere around us. And yet, we want to live forever. We want to keep living. We don't think we ourselves are going to die. This is the amazing thing. And this, says Swami Vivekananda, this is Maya. So we have a strange and complex relationship with death. On the one hand, somewhere we know it's true, but we have this strange complex of, on the one hand, denying it, on the other hand, being fascinated with it. We're fascinated with death, yet we're also terrified of it, and we're ready to fight it. So you can say denial, fascination, fear, and battle with death. Most people, I think, try to forget it, put it out of their minds. It's always, other people may die, but I'm not going to think about it. It's not going to happen to me. And it reminds me of, there was a famous French artist of sorts, one of the groundbreakers of modern art, Marcel Duchamp. And on his epitaph, on his gravestone, is written, D'ailleurs, c'est toujours les autres qui meurent. Besides, it's always the others who die. So his epitaph was a kind of artwork. He was a conceptual artist, kind of artwork itself. To say, here his dead body lies, and yet the headstone says, besides, it's always the others who die. So, on the one hand, this American society, perhaps more than many, is a real death-denying kind of society, and yet we're fascinated at the same time. Look at the movies. Movies are full of death. They're full of violence and shootings, and then there's the horror films. Many people love horror films. They love to see people get dismembered and horribly killed. What's that all about? The kind of fascination for death. And Halloween is another one. Halloween is a big poking at fun at death. Video games, shoot 'em up. A lot of death there too. And the news is full of death, death, and death. So it's a strange thing that on the one hand we're fascinated with death, and yet we don't want to face the fact of our own impending demise. And it becomes really difficult to accept also, and perhaps sometimes more difficult even, to accept the deaths of our loved ones, especially when they die unexpectedly or, to our minds, prematurely, and we're consumed with grief. And we're also strange, I feel it's somehow related that we are unable to, as a society, as a humanity, to recognize that we are furiously consuming the earth's resources, unmindful of the impending collapse of the ecosystem. This is also a strange kind of denial of the death of our ecosystem, our climate, and all the life systems on this planet, while we are doing our best to contribute to it by consuming resources furiously and madly and not thinking about tomorrow. So it's a kind of collective denial of the impending extinction of the human race. It's always somebody else who dies. Now, the human race will certainly go extinct one day or other because it had a beginning and it will have an end. And whether it comes in 10 years or 50 years or 100 years or 1,000 years or 1,000,000 years, but it must come. Why? Because the sun itself has an expiration date. And I love to think about that sometimes, that when it looks really grim on this little planet Earth, just remember, well, the sun itself will die one day. It will run out of fuel, not in our lifetimes, but in some time, the hydrogen will have fused into helium, and it will run out of that process, and it will become a red giant before it collapses into a white dwarf. And the outer limits of that star, our sun, when it expands to become a red giant, will be beyond the orbit the earth. So the earth will be our precious earth, our precious home, will be, as it were, burnt to a crisp and absorbed into the sun. So that's something to think about. But you all look very serious now. I've painted a very grim picture. And I'm going to go just a little further with it, because even in our death rituals, in this country at least, we have somebody else take care of it. Even if our near and dear ones die, what do? You call up the coroner, you call up the funeral home, they come take the body away. Then they put makeup on it and dress it nicely and make it look like, we try to make those bodies look like the person's still alive, with makeup and all those things. They do a great job sometimes. I recently saw one of our dear devotees, his mother had left her body, and they did such a nice job with makeup and everything. She looked just like she's alive, lying there, just alive, suspended animation. But it's a kind of strange practice, because it's now just an empty shell, that body. And our language, passed away, kicked the bucket. We don't like to say died. And actually, if we compare the beauty of the Vedantic way of saying it, left to the body. See the difference? We say someone died has a finality to it, so we say, oh, passed away, or kicked the bucket, or what's some other, gone to the happy hunting grounds. Left the body. That's the Vedantic understanding. So, on the one hand, we try to deny death, and on the other, we're furiously fighting it. Little gray hair, bring out the hair dye. Few wrinkles, bring out the Botox. In medical establishment, you know very well, I gather that in medical school, the training is to regard death as the enemy, in a sense. All the training is to keep people, to heal illness and to keep people alive. And though it is changing, but still I think there's a strong sense of, at all costs, keep the person alive. Even at the end of life, when someone is advanced age and body is failing, and there's no reason to extend life artificially by another month with invasive procedures, still, unless you have signed a legal document saying, I don't want a breathing tube put in, they have to put one, and they will put one. There's an interesting quote, interesting observation about the end of life. Modern medicine has not only prolonged living, but has also prolonged dying. Recent advances in biomedicine have converted grave illnesses like cancer into chronic illnesses. It means they drag on for a long, long time. So that's a kind of a sobering thought. That was from the Stanford School of Medicine, that quote. So, and then, every year when Halloween comes around, I'm kind of fascinated and flabbergasted. I don't fully understand it, because I walk around in our neighborhood in Los Angeles, and people make the most grotesque, gruesome kind of displays on their front lawns, like coffins with skeletons starting to crawl out of them, or the Grim Reaper, death, carrying his scythe and looking actually quite horrible. Or sometimes there's some skeleton that's not fully decomposed, hanging on the fence. Horrible stuff. And what is that? This kind of, almost like it's a poking fun at death, a fascination for the macabre. The fun of being scared while knowing that it's not really true. Yeah, this is death, but it's not really. I'm not dying. This is just in fun. One quote I found of one blogger made a nice observation. He writes, "Halloween is our now secular substitute for serious death conversations and rituals. It lets us spit in the face of Mr. Death. It allows us to laugh into the abyss instead of staring into it in dread." So I think the Halloween belies or covers up a deep discomfort, actually, with death. And so we laugh at death instead of being terrified of it. And yet, death always has the last laugh. Death always gets the last laugh. He always wins. So I think that actually, when we see in India, and those of you who have grown up in India know that their death is much more accepted as a part of life. And when somebody dies, you don't bring in the professionals. The family comes around, bathes the body, dresses it in a shroud, carries it to the cremation ground. Bus. It's very, so it's real. You've bathed the dead body. You've carried it. You've touched it. You understand. It's now an empty shell. Whereas if you let somebody else handle it, you don't get that understanding. So the banishing of death to hospitals and mortuaries makes it less real. And maybe this is a good time to mention that there is now a tradition, a growing tradition of taking back control over one's death rituals for one's families. And in most states, it's perfectly legal to keep a body of your beloved departed, whoever it may be, parent or spouse or child even, at your own home for several days. And do the rituals and bathe the body yourself and dress the body and do whatever rituals you want to do. And that's called the home funeral movement. And it's taking back control over the death process. And of course the hospice movement, which is now a much bigger, it is becoming well established. And that is also helps us acknowledge, yes, there comes a time when we have to acknowledge death is coming. And rather than deny it, rather than pretend like the patient is going to get better, while deep inside knowing that they're not going to get better, we tell the patient, look, doesn't look good, you're not going to recover from this. And it gives the person a chance to get ready. So that's actually a great blessing, and we'll get more into that. Something that I should just mention about Halloween. Actually, Halloween's roots are in a much more healthy ritual that went back to the Celtic tradition of Ireland, which was, in those ancient days, it was a New Year's celebration, a seasonal acknowledgement of the annual change from a season of life to one of death. And the Celts used these celebrations to settle their debts, thin their herds of livestock, and appease the spirits, the kinds of preparations one might make if they are genuinely unsure whether they will survive the winter. So it was an acknowledgement of the change of seasons, an acknowledgement of death. And then when Christianity came to the country, Ireland, the Christians made it into what was called All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. That is honoring the dead, honoring the people who came before us, our ancestors. And that was, Halloween was called the evening before that, All Hallows Eve. All Hallows Eve became Halloween. And then there's a beautiful tradition in Mexico. I don't know if you're familiar with it here in North Carolina, but in California we're very much aware of it. And it's celebrated widely in Los Angeles also as the Dia de los Muertos, which is the Day of the Dead, which is actually stretches out for several days on November 1 and 2. And it's a joyous celebration of one's ancestors. And they make these beautiful altars with pictures of their beloved ancestors, their parents who have died, or their family members or friends. and make offerings and celebrate. And it's actually a celebration of joy and even humor, remembering funny things about the departed people. And the tradition is that the dead would be offended if we were all grieving and morose, remembering them. So it should be a celebration of joy. So this seems like a very healthy attitude. And it reminds me of what we monks do when one of our monks dies. Of course, we have the cremation as soon as possible. And then 13 days afterwards, we have a feast where it's just monks who come, or monks, and in our case in Hollywood, monks and nuns. And we come and celebrate the person, the monastic brother or sister who left us, and have a big feast with all the foods that that person used to love. And it's a joyous thing. So that also seems like a very healthy attitude. We stand on the shoulders of our ancestors, and to honor them, love them, respect them is very healthy. One story, it's actually a ancient story from Iraq. There was once upon a time a wealthy merchant in Baghdad. And he had a servant who would do the grocery shopping. And so one day, as usual, the servant took the money and went into the market to buy the groceries. But he came back suddenly, terrified. And the merchant could see that his devoted servant was terrified. And what happened? Oh, sir, I was in the market and somebody jostled me, and I turned to look, and it was death. Oh, sir, I'm not ready, please. Lend me your horse. I know someone in Samara. I'll go ride to Samara and hide from him. The merchant was a compassionate man, and so he said, yes, of course. Please take my fastest horse. And so the horse was saddled up, and the servant galloped off towards Samara, 80 miles to the north. Then the merchant thought, well, what is this? What is death doing, bothering my servant? So he went into the market and he looked around and he found death. He said, hey, death, why did you threaten my servant? Why did you threaten my servant so severely? And death said, oh no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to threaten him. I was just so surprised to see him here in Baghdad. You see, I have an appointment with him tonight in Samara. So you can't escape death. No matter how much we try, we can't escape death. And Swami Vivekananda puts it this way. Then there is the tremendous fact of death. The whole world is going towards death. Everything dies. All our progress, our vanities, our reforms, our luxuries, our wealth, our knowledge, have that one end, death. That is all that is certain. Cities come and go, empires rise and fall, planets break into pieces and crumble into dust to be blown about by the atmospheres of other planets. Thus it has been going on from time without beginning. Death is the end of everything. Death is the end of life, of beauty, of wealth, of power, of virtue too. Saints die and sinners die. Kings die and beggars die. They are all going to death. So this is news for all of us. You and I, we are all going to die. So, what would happen if, rather than getting depressed about this and running away from it and trying desperately to forget it, what if we embraced it? What if we, as it were, made friends with it, made friends with death, made friends with this inevitability of the demise of this physical form? Death, after all, is a part of life. It's a part of the pairs of opposites. Just as heat and cold come together, and pleasure and pain come together, and life and death, they come together. They're just two sides of one coin. Can we come to a deep acceptance of our mortality. After all, it's just the body. What would happen if we do that? What happens when we are able to do that? If we come to a deep acceptance of death, if we remember death, and we have a strong awareness of our mortality. Does it mean we are always depressed and afraid? No. I think it is then that we can really begin to live, paradoxically, as it may seem, that we can then really begin to live. And there are 4 points that I want to mention about that. If we can really accept death and embrace death, and now remember, because we are Vedantists, we always understand death as a change of garment. We understand that it is that we do not die, our bodies die, and we leave them behind. So, if we can truly accept this fact, then what is left to fear? Why should we be afraid of anything? If everything is going to be taken from us anyway, what is there to be afraid of? The coward dies 1,000 deaths, but the hero dies with once. If we are unafraid to die, then why be afraid of anything here? Some people are terrified of public speaking. But you're going to die, so what does it matter? I had a friend in college, and she was very bold in things, and I asked her, how you're so fearless? And she said, I have accepted that I'm going to die. And so what more can I be afraid of? And I really appreciated that attitude. Yes, it makes us fearless. We can really accept it. And second, it makes each moment present, rather precious. It makes each moment precious, and we can begin to live in the present moment. Actually, we are only ever living in the present moment. But most people, most of the time, most of us, we live either in the regrets over the past or the fears over the future. Most of the time, we're either afraid about something or worried about something or concerned about something or planning for something or wanting something in the future, or we're either happily remembering something that happened in the past or as often as not woefully regretting that stupid thing we did way back then, or that unfortunate thing that happened to us, and that jerk who stabbed me in the back, and yada yada yada. We live in the past and the future. But that's not living. Remembering that death is certain makes it imperative to us. It forces us to realize that there's no point in worrying about the future. Be here now. It has this beautiful effect. Now is the only time we gain the freedom of this moment. In fact, if you think about it, each day is a death. Each day, at the end of the day is over. That day will never come back again. So we offer that day at the feet of the Lord, and the next day we have a new opportunity to live fully in the present, in the awareness of the divine, in divine service, in the present moment. What a wonderful opportunity. And I think coming to accept death and remembering death is a great help towards reminding us, yes, I need to be aware now. I can only live now. I cannot live in the future. Death is certain in the future, sometime. Let me live here and now. And I spoke on this subject in Hollywood, and someone told me, Swami, there's an app for that. There's an app you can get on your phone, and it's called something like We Die. And 5 times a day, it sends a little reminder onto your phone with a little tone. You know how the apps send their reminders. And generally I've turned all those off, but this one I kept it, I installed it on my phone. It's great. 5 times a day, it comes up and it says, remember, you will die. It's great. So you can check it out. And then if you tap on the little flag, it gives some quote. The quotes, some of them are good, some of them maybe not so good, but they give some quote related to death. And the idea behind the creators of the app was that also that one should remember death. When one remembers death, it forces one to truly live. So, okay, number 3, the third point. Detachment grows. Detachment. How much of our suffering is because we get attached to things, and things don't go the way we want them to go, and then we suffer because we're attached. We can't let go. We can't let go of the insult that somebody spoke to us yesterday or last week or last month, and so we suffer. Detachment. I used to admire Swami Mahayogananda very much for his detachment. He just didn't get excited about stuff. You know, the stuff that's going on in society, he was completely detached about politics. Though interestingly, he likes to discuss politics, but you could never tell which side of a subject he was on, because he was actually completely detached from. I don't think he had an opinion on politics. He just was interested in discussing it. But it fascinated him the way things work out like that. But he was completely detached from it. And people get upset in the monastery, and the devotees get upset, and all kinds of dramas, and completely calm. I asked him once, how do you stay so detached from all this stuff? And he said, you see, we have one foot in the grave. So he also used this. He had this consciousness that I have one foot in the grave. Now that time he was not that old. I think when I asked him, he must have been about 75 or something. It's not that old nowadays, though maybe he's old school, so 75 is pretty old. But anyhow, he had this strong sense of, yes, I'm going to die, so why get so wrapped up in all the dramas? You can be detached, and that helps us to live here and now in the present, when we're detached, and gives us peace. And you know that something that we see in some elderly people, not only elderly people, but that's when it finally comes to a head, is people who have a compulsion to save stuff for a rainy day or for just in case. And we had one monk who had a whole garage full of papers that he somehow felt compelled to save and save and save. You're going to die. Well, why save? What does it matter? We're going to die. Yes. Like Peace Pilgrim, whose friend was working her fingers to the bone for a 4-bedroom house, and but she was alone. So Peace Pilgrim asked her, "Why are you working so hard? Why do you have a 4-bedroom house? You live alone. You're working so hard to pay that house." And she said, "Yes, but I have furniture for all the bedrooms." So she's working herself to death for furniture that she doesn't use because she can't let it go. Let it go, let it go, let it go, let all that stuff go. We're going to die. Hallelujah, we'll be free of all that stuff. And we won't be able to take any of it with us. Except, what do we take with us? Our mind. We take with us our mind. So this is a very important thing to remember. We take with us our mind, our tendencies. If we have tendencies towards negative tendencies, those also will come with us. And positive tendencies, those will come with us. Our deeds which we have done, they come with us also. Our deeds which we have done. That's the karma aspect of it. So, we cultivate a healthy mind by remembering death and knowing that everything else doesn't come with us. Nothing comes with us. Like the guy, there was a guy who was determined to take his treasure, his gold, with him to heaven. So he instructed his family, he was on his deathbed, he instructed his family, put the gold in the attic. And so they put it, they said, Dad, you can't take it with you. No, just do what I say. I'm going to take it with, I'm going to put it in the attic. So his idea was on his way up, he would take the gold with him. So they put the gold in the attic, and Dad died. And after, they said, well, let's go see. So they went up to the attic, and all the gold is still there. And then one of the brothers says to the other, I knew it, we should have put it in the basement.
The same story with Tolstoy, how much land does a man need?
Yeah.
Same story.
I think some of you didn't get the joke, but it's okay. It'll dawn on you later. Okay, sorry. Fourth, remembering death, it impels us to remember God. It forces us to remember God. As Vedantists, as people of faith, we do have faith that there is a higher reality, a divine reality called God, and the keeping death constantly in mind reminds us to think of the divine. To seek for that which does not die. To find out that in me which does not die. Yes, this body is going to die. What is that in me that does not die? So that's the beauty of remembering death, keeping death in mind, coming to terms with our own death. And I'd like to remember a beautiful story. It's quite an amazing story of an ancient king named Parikshita. King Parikshita was the king of Hastinapura. He is Arjuna's grandson, so he's in the lineage of the Pandavas. And he was he was a good king, but he had a little temper problem. And one day, he went out on a hunt, and he was doing what you do on a hunt, I guess, hunting animals, and he got very tired and thirsty towards the end of the day, and he came upon a hermitage, an ashrama of a sage, and the sage Shamika, and he was thirsty and hungry, and he asked for nourishment, and naturally one expects that if one comes upon a hermitage, one will receive some water at least, and maybe some snack or some roots and fruits. But the sage was immersed in deep meditation and was not even aware that the king was present. So deep was his meditation that he didn't hear King Parikshita address him, but the king thought he was faking it. He thought, this guy he's not meditating like that, he's faking. And he got really angry, and what did he do? He searched around and he found a dead snake. And he took that snake with a couple of sticks and he draped it around the sage's neck and left in a huff. The sage was entirely unaware of it. The sage's son came to the ashrama and found a dead snake hanging around his dad's neck, and he got furious. And he was also a sage. Now these sages, when they utter a curse, it has to come true. So this sage's son, Shamika's son, whose name was Shringi, cursed, whoever did this will die in 7 days from poisonous snake bite. That was the curse. Now when the sage Shamika came out of his samadhi and found his son angry and all that, he found out what happened, and he was mortified that his son should have uttered such a curse, but nothing can be done. Such a curse once uttered must come to fruition. Well, they did send word to the king, King Parikshita, that this had happened. And so he received a word that in 7 days you're going to die. And there's nothing you can do about it. What did he do? What would you do if you got news in 7 days you're going to die? What would you do?
That's when Bhagavatam happened.
All right. Well, so what King Parikshit did, he went, he gave up, he put his son on the throne, he gave up the kingdom. He said, okay, this is my time has come, but I have 7 days to prepare. So he gave up his throne, he put his son installed his son as the new king, and immediately retired to the bank of the holy Ganga. And amazing, this detachment. He let go of everything. He let go of all his status and his worldly power, his unfinished business, unfulfilled dreams, unresolved relationships, everything. He let it all go. And he created a suitable environment for leaving his body. And he started fasting, and people hearing about this, they started to gather. Sages came to see the king preparing for death, and what a glorious thing he's doing. He's actually preparing for death. He's going to keep his mind on God and leave the body consciously. He's going to try for this. And one shining young sage appeared there also. His name is Shukadeva. And the king asked him how one should prepare for death. And this is where Shukadeva recites the teachings of Bhagavata to King Parikshita. And we have the scripture, the Bhagavata. And so the king spent the last days thinking about Sri Krishna and about the doings of the divine in this world. And on the last day, sure enough, the snake came and bit him, and he left the body consciously and attained the divine. So how fortunate, actually, that he was to have this time to prepare. He had time to prepare and leave the body fully conscious and attain freedom. About 10% of us, the statisticians say, about 10% of us will die suddenly without any warning. Most of us, 90%, have some warning, illness or other illness mostly, I guess. 10% sudden death, widowmaker heart attack, or stroke, or accident, car crash, major car crash, whatever, so many different ways. The rest of us have, we all, as Swami Mahayogananda says, we all have this expiration date. Only we don't know what the date is. King Parikshit had this 7 days. He was lucky. But we all have it. Only we don't know. It's always some nebulous future, and so we just put it off. So actually, but we all have to make this journey. So better to prepare now and pack our bags. If we're going to go to India, we have to plan ahead, right? Book the tickets, pack our bags, think, well, I need to bring all these gifts for all these different people, all those things. That's that kind of planning. This is also a big journey. We should plan. Our tickets are also booked. Only the date of the booking is not quite clear. The date is not quite clear. So, how do we pack our bags for this journey? How do we pack our bags? By doing sadhana, by doing spiritual practice, by practicing fixing our mind on God. Why? It is said that the last thoughts we have as we are leaving the body determine, or at least influence to a great extent, our trajectory afterwards. So you know the story of King Bharata, who was he also, like King Parikshit, he also gave up his kingdom and he retired to an ashrama, and he was preparing for death, and he thought he'll meditate and leave his body consciously and attain the divine. But as things unfolded, a doe came there and gave birth to a little baby deer, a fawn, and died. And so the king saw this fawn there, without anyone to take care of it, he started naturally he had some compassion, and baby deer are so cute. So he naturally he fell in love with this deer, and he raised it, and he was looking after it. So he became so attached to the deer, and then the time came for him to give up the body. It was time for his death, and he thought, what will happen to my deer? So he wasn't thinking of God, he was thinking of a deer, and he had to be reborn as a deer. So he had a life as a deer in between. And then, of course, finally he had his last life, he came as an illumined sage who was determined not to get attached to anything. So that idea of our last thought, and it's a great opportunity. Leaving the body, we have such strong body consciousness, but at the time of death, we are freed of that. Now, what will we do when we're freed of body consciousness, when we're freed of the strictures of this physical form? We can prepare for that. As we practice in meditation, in prayer, fixing our minds on the divine, practice thinking of ourselves not as bodies, but as spirit, as consciousness, then at that time it becomes a wonderful opportunity to experience the divine without the mediation of this rather these organs, these sense organs, which are in fact incredibly limited and limiting. So just wanted to touch on a little bit of the practical side. Some things we can do in our life, and of course some of us here under the age of 20 might be a little premature to take care of those things, but things like making a will. How many of us have made a will? Raise your hand. Who has made a will? 1, 2. I see in this room only 2 people have made a will. Well, there's 2 people who have accepted their own death to the extent that they wanted to direct what happens to their belongings or their money that they have collected and all that. Nobody else has any thoughts about that? Make a will. It's part of accepting our death is to make a will. I should confess, though as a monk, it's not that I have major property to give away. I have written a will, but I did not have it notarized yet. So I'm also halfway there only. But maybe it's not quite as big a deal since, anyhow. So make a will. Then, what about advanced directive, end of life care? If you fall really sick and you need a breathing tube, and the doctors decide, well, to keep you alive, we need to put in a feeding tube and connect you to your body to all kinds of machines, how far do you want that to go? If you don't make a legal document specifying that and let your family members know what you want, they might not have the guts to say, no, don't put in the breathing, don't put him on a ventilator, don't put a feeding tube in her stomach. They might not have the nerve to do it because they're not sure. So if you don't want it, you have to let them know. And it's best to put it in writing. It seems like, it's some legal matter, but it also has a deep spiritual significance because it helps us really come to terms with the fact that, yes, I will actually die, and it could be at the end that I could be hooked up to all kinds of machines, and I don't want that. Maybe you do want it. Maybe we do want that. And don't worry, the language is very specific. It's when there is no chance of recovery. When the doctors determine there is no chance of recovery, then this kind of life support equipment will not be given or will be withdrawn. So that's something else to do. You can plan your death ritual. Some people like to plan their funeral, what music they want to have played or how it should be done. You have to think about these things. Don't shy away from the death of other people. One can it's a blessing to be at the bedside of someone as they leave the body. It's a tremendous blessing. I've had that blessing several times. Anybody else had the blessing to be present when a loved one leaves the body? So you know it's a blessing. And it also drives home very deeply that it's leaving behind a body. And once they're gone, the body becomes a shell, an empty shell, which is no doubt still precious to us because it housed the soul of a dear relative or friend or relation. And yet it's just a shell. It's a beautiful experience to do that. To perform the death rituals, to do a home funeral, to bathe a body. To bathe a body and dress it. There's nothing frightening about a dead body. People sometimes are afraid, ooh, dead body. Actually, the dead body cannot hurt us. It's only in very rare cases, rare certain diseases that may be still contagious. COVID apparently, as what I've read, is cannot be transmitted by a dead body. I think Ebola probably can. So there's certain rare diseases but otherwise it's very safe. And it's a beautiful practice. Sometimes when we see the people at the end, oftentimes they get very weak, and especially with the hospice and you know the life has been prolonged for a long time, and now finally everything is breaking down, and we can get very weak and have just enough strength to breathe, and then the breath. You see, I've seen our dear Swami Mahayogananda on his last. I spent quite a bit of time in the last couple of days of his life. He left us just a few months ago. And I saw that at the end, all he had strength for was to breathe. And he was not visibly conscious of us around him, though I believe he probably was conscious to a certain extent, but just and then the gap between breaths gets longer and longer. So at that time, we can't meditate. I don't think we can meditate. But what can we hold on to? What will we hold on to? We can hold on to the name or the mantra, the name of God, the holy name of God. So in order to do that, we have to practice it. We have to practice it. So now is the time to practice holding on to the name. As Sri Ramakrishna says, you know, about the very worldly-minded person who says, well, I think of God now. I'll think of God when it's time to die. I'm not going to think of God now. But Sri Ramakrishna aptly points out, when it's time for him to die, he can't think of God. He's still thinking about all the worldly things that he thought about his whole life. He says, turn the lamp down, you're burning too much oil. He's about to leave his body, and he can't think of God. So we have to practice now. So probably I've spoken too much and made you all very serious. You know, there's a tradition in Sufism that the mystics call fana, or to die before you die. And this is a wonderful secret of spiritual realization. In spiritual realization, when we realize the infinitude of our own being, that part of us which is finite has to die. That part of us which is limited does have to die. That part of us which is identified with this limited body and this limited personality, that has to disappear. So actually, to die before you die is a great blessing. And that's something to just tuck in with all the things I've discussed today. This idea that this play comes to an end, and this whole play with this costume that we're wearing like a Halloween costume. We're playing a play, and I'm wearing the costume of Swami M with an orange robe, and you're wearing the costume of Samrat Das with a yellow jacket and sometimes with a white coat and a stethoscope around your neck, and all of you are playing your roles. But we take them off. We take them off. And if we can do that in meditation, then we can die before we die. We can put it back on again at the end of the meditation, and take it off, and we get very close to our true nature, very close to the divine. So that is something to really to embrace. Embrace the peeling off of our temporal being and embracing our infinitude of infinite consciousness and joy and love, our true self. There's a beautiful song that I'd like to close with. I don't know if I'm going to sing it, but I'm going to share the translation. It's a Ram Prasad song, and the first line goes like this: Abhay pade pran champechi abhyar ki jamir bhare kechi Abhay pade pran champechi. So the idea is that I have surrendered my soul. I have offered my whole life at those feet of the Mother which grant fearlessness. Can I be afraid of Yama anymore? Can I be afraid of death? I have offered my entire being at the Divine Mother's feet. How can I be afraid of death? And there's some beautiful lines in this song. Deep within my heart, I have planted the name of Kali, which is the Kalpataru, the wish-fulfilling tree of heaven. When Yama comes, I'll open my heart and show it growing there. So when Yama comes, as it were, to take us, we can open our heart and say, see, Mother Kali is here. Mother, you can't take me. I'm going to her, not going with you. In this way, actually we can have the last laugh when we have Mother Kali planted in our heart. Probably that's enough for tonight. If you have any comments or questions, that's welcome.
You know, Tagore, at his deathbed, he was ready to go.
Yes.
Tagore. So he has a beautiful poem. He did it.
On his deathbed?
Yeah. It says, Paschate Nitya Sahachar. Chinna kor স্বপ্নের বন্ধন রেখেছে হরণ করি বেদনার ধন যত কামনার রঙিন ব্যর্থতা মৃত্যুরে ফিরায় দাও আজি মেঘমুক্ত আকাশেতে দূরে যাওয়া চিরপথিকে বাঁশিতে বেজেছে ধ্বনি আমি তারি হব অনুগামী.
Well, now you better translate it for us.
Oh, it's very difficult. He was telling, I'm ready to go. That's the main thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I accept the death, and I'm ready to go. And he said, my deeds, I can take my deeds only, whatever I did here.
Yes, yes.
Nothing else.
Yes.
I leave all my sufferings and others behind. Then what was the next line did you say?
Huh?
If you say one line at a time,
One
then
line at a
many
time.
of us can translate it. Hey, Mashamanja.
আচ্ছা পশ্চাতে নিত্য সহচর ছিন্ন করো স্বপ্নের বন্ধন
Oschate.
নিত্য
Person is
সহচর
behind, something behind, so I'm going to cut asunder all the shackles, okay,
It's
which is
the-
holding behind.
Okay, this is your homework. You take it, you
We will
make
do
a
the
translation
homework,
and you send it to all of us by email. Okay?
It's quite, I got the steam of it, you see, but I'm not able to translate.
Yeah, that's
line
your
by line.
homework. That's your homework.
Yeah. I'll
You can work
take it as
together.
my homework.
You can work on it together.
Yeah.
There's a tradition of the Zen Buddhist masters writing a poem right before they die. They would write a poem, a death poem, and then give up the body. So So that's something similar. Tagore also did the same thing. Wonderful.
But the question is people really, I know what you say, that afraid of death, or they're afraid of the suffering prior to the death?
That may be part of it.
You
I-
see,
but I
what
think-
could be more pleasant
Mm.
than sudden death of the 10%? I don't mean by a car accident or something. But if you die we all will, we all know that,
You know.
consciously or unconsciously. The question is, in my mind, it's not the death most of the people are afraid of. It's the suffering that leads up to it. If somehow you can eliminate the suffering, this will be a very joyful event.
Yeah, for you, who are a man of deep faith and Vedantic attitude, but I think for most people there's a doubt. That same doubt that we talked about last night. Some people say at death a person is. Some people say he is not. Which is it? The fear of annihilation, a fear of the unknown. For most people, death is still the great unknown.
No,
Otherwise, why everyone should just go commit suicide?
Yeah.
And it's a
I
fear
cannot answer
and,
those things, but
and a fear of having to and a fear of having everything we love torn away from us. A fear of the loss of everything. A fear of not fulfilling our desires and our dreams that we wanted to attain.
you have a point there.
But
I
you
don't
also
know.
have a point. This fear of suffering, yes, that's
The
also. a
fear
good
of
point.
suffering is the worst.
Yes. But with the blessing as a devotee, I spent few days last week with someone. They wonderfully accepted this one, you know.
Uh-huh.
Oh, last night I was with them, but the way they accept it, I can't believe.
Uh-huh.
So coolly, they don't like to take the medicine, and
Uh-huh.
it's
They're
amazing.
ready. Uh-huh.
I think they got the blessings and all, they could
Yeah.
accept it.
Yeah.
So that is the whole thing, like you have to prepare, like
No,
suddenly it will not
I
happen.
met someone, they prepared so well,
Yeah.
but I feel bad, you know.
Uh-huh.
So, I don't know, it was amazing.
Uh-huh.
They're slowly accepting the thing that, okay, we have to go,
Yeah.
we did our best.
Yeah.
But of course, they're scared of suffering sometimes, the
Uh-huh.
worst suffering.
You are right, Maharaj, in certain respect, that there is a lot of people who like to, with medication, all this thing or the other, unnecessary prolongation of
Yes,
life,
yes.
which have, to my mind, have no value,
Mm.
and it's a drain to the society.
Mm.
And the proof of that is in Medicare, if you like, the last 5 years, Samara wrote the number, last 5 years of of the people's life here, 90% of the medical expense takes in the last 5 years.
I think it might be more like the last 5 weeks.
Yeah,
Oftentimes.
Maybe, you know, and this
Yeah.
is just pointless, you know.
yeah, in Japan, they're worried about that. They have more than 100 years, at least more than 100,000 people.
And, you know, it seems, in some ways it seems kind of cruel, but some of the Native American peoples here on this land here, the ones that were nomadic, when the elders realized that their time was coming, when the tribe would pack up and move to the next place, they would remain behind.
That's
Yeah,
right.
yes.
And they would say, it's my time now, you go, and then they would leave their bodies there.
Okay, we'll talk enough about that.
Okay.
Cheer up, everybody.
Well, it's been a joy to be here for the last 5 days, and I met, I think, all of you a number of times here, at least once or twice, and Devashish for the first time tonight, and it's always a joy to see all of you and your sincerity and your dedication to spiritual life and to Vedanta. And I'd like to remind you that this is your center. As I always remind you, feel like it's not somebody else's center, it's your center, it's our center. So we come here because it's our place, and that means we also feel a certain responsibility perhaps for it. We can feel that yes, we should look after the center a little. Maybe that means that one day we like to come and sweep the porch or something. Or clean the pictures on the altar or something, and get the blessing of doing a little seva. And I think the most important element of an ashrama, often we're talking about building a new building or finding a property and all that, the most important part of this center is you. It's us. It's the people who make it up. So with your dedication and your interest and your support, the center will thrive, and it will be a place of community. It's a community, a spiritual community, and that's always a help in spiritual life, to have like-minded people who also are interested in this Vedanta business and in the spiritual life, and because most people are not too interested. And so it's a great help and support, and so I encourage you to be a part of it. And when these masks can come off, then it'll really be a relief, and we can come together more freely and support each other more freely. But until that time, we'll continue in this way and hold on to Mother's feet as best we can. So, I think that's it.
Thank you very much for
Thank
you
you.
coming. And my personal regret is I could not participate as much as I normally do when you are here. And that because of the circumstances beyond our control. But I really regret that. You know, I only had 1 hour of talk with you one day and came to a couple of readings, but that wasn't enough because you've been here for 4 days. You should have been, at least I should have been here every day and every time, you know.
Yeah. No, it's a difficult time, but let's hold on to Mother, and we'll close with a prayer. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyoti Gamaya Mrityor Ma Mritam Gamaya Avir Avir Ma Evi Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukham Tena Mam Vahi Nityam Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. From the unreal, lead us to the real. From darkness, lead us unto light. From death, lead us to immortality. Om Peace, Peace,
I think in the YouTube it was very clear when you're presenting every day.
Oh, good, good.
Without opening this map.
Yeah. In fact, I have to turn this off now. Thanks to those who joined us from afar, and good night.